Welcome to the Anton Stentner podcast. And today we're going to talk about how rent control just made Washington's housing problems even worse because some new legislation just got brought up,
legislation, right? Yeah. So what's up? Let's dissect this economic madness. And this is like the hot potato of our time. It's rent control. It's a policy that's supposed to help the struggling because we've had inflation, we've had rents shoot up. But this often turns into this crazy dumpster fire with massive unintended consequences. And so we're going to deep dive into kind of Washington's housing experiment today, House Bill 1217. But this isn't just about Seattle, because now the West Coast all has rent control. So if you don't think this is coming to your area, think again. It starts in the liberal states and it kind of pushes its way across. So this is the start of that nationwide cage match between landlords, the government, tenants, and the brutal unintended consequences of what we're going to see. For everyone, is rent too high? Absolutely. Like, you're not wrong. Like, rent is too freaking high. But the question is does capping prices solve that problem? Or is this like a punt maneuver in football where they're just kicking the can down the road and it's going to make the problem even more exasperated? It's going to maybe screw it up. So we're going to talk about like what is rent control, the basics of rent control, what's happening in Washington, what's happened over history, the winners, the losers, some hard data, and then a conclusion right here on what we're seeing. So who am I? I'm Anton Stentner. I'm here in the Seattle Metro. I've been a real estate investor for over 20 years here. We own a bunch of rentals. We own real estate brokerages. We have sold thousands of properties. So we're deeply involved in this on a personal and a financial level, both for ourselves and our clients. So I want to make that really clear. Like, this impacts me directly. This impacts my clients directly. But even more concerning, I actually think this impacts our communities in a negative aspect more than what people are thinking, and we'll get to that.
So, Anton, tell me, what is rent control? Like, how is it implemented? Why is it implemented? I think there's some obvious answers, but people maybe don't understand like how it's kind of deployed out to people that own houses.
Yeah. So rent control, by definition, the old school idea or the hardcore model is basically, it's just a price ceiling. It's capping the growth of rent over a period of time. And by definition, this sounds like a good idea. This is one of those idealisms that on paper sounds good, that allows politicians to win, and it gives people a good feeling. And then we have what's called rent stabilization. Rent stabilization is like the kinder, gentler cousin of rent control, where they allow some increases due to inflation, but both are fundamentally kind of messing with the laws of supply and demand. And then, Benji, Economics 101, supply and demand. What happens when we restrict supply? Like, we're going to artificially restrict supply without changing demand. What's going to happen?
Well, the price goes up.
The price goes up. And this is the problem with all rent control legislation, is it's designed to protect the most needy. And we need to protect them. So don't misinterpret this. But this method of doing it, unfortunately, ends up hurting the most needy who need the most affordable rents.
I think one thing we should mention, though, is the other side of this. I think generally speaking, if you rent, you love this, right? You're like, hey, my rent's not going to go up or it's going to be capped, because I've rented apartments in the past and I remember like when they would raise it, no matter what the amount is, like, oh, no one likes that. The flip side of this is the people that own these. And it's not always like some big bad rental company, it could just be like your neighbor that has like a second house.
The vast majority of real estate that's owned by investors in the United States, not just Washington, the vast majority is owned by people who own two properties, a primary residence and one rental. And what happens is everyone thinks the majority is the big bad wolf. It's a hedge fund. It's Blackstone. It's Vanguard. It's Main Street. It's one of these people, the boogeyman, coming to get you. But that represents such a small percentage of the actual rental pool. So this is all ma and pa.
Yeah. And then on that note, can you give me the really quick take from their perspective of why rent controls are bad and move into Washington State's HB 1217 and why that's going to make the situation worse?
So generally speaking, rent control is bad because what happens when you artificially cap prices is that the landlord, for fear they may not be able to raise them in the future, will always max raise. And traditionally speaking, the ma and pa landlord actually raises their rents slower than the hedge fund, slower than the REIT, slower than the boogeyman. And what this is going to do is this is going to force the small investor to raise their rents for fear of not being able to raise their rents in the future. All the while, though, inflation has caused insurance to get out of control, property taxes to get out of control, maintenance to get out of control. So if a landlord can't raise their rents to keep up with that, what do they start doing? They start skipping. They start skipping on maintenance. They start skipping on upkeeping the property.
Or just like even building or buying more rental properties, less supply.
Bingo. Mutually over there behind the ones and twos was just like, my dad was like upset about this. You know how many calls I've received in the last couple of weeks from our investors upset about this? I believe it creates a hidden opportunity, and we're going to get to that at the end. But what this does is it puts more regulation on an already overregulated industry in Washington, which is housing. And the reason I say we're overregulated is because we're undersupplied. Just simple. To answer your question though, like House Bill 1217, Washington State's House Bill. So Washington State jumped on the bandwagon and came out with this bad boy that caps rents at 7% a year plus CPI or 10%, whichever is less. And then it gives new construction a hall pass. So if it's within the last 12 years, don't have to do it. And then there's a whole song and dance about this just cause evictions. This is where things get really hairy, because when you start controlling the growth of rent, what you're doing is you're decontrolling vacancy. In other words, if I can't raise my rent fast enough, what am I going to do as a landlord? I'm not going to renew their lease. I'm going to let them move out. Then I'm going to max raise the rent and pull a new person in. What does that do for the stability of a community? That hurts the stability of a community and a family. I want to do everything humanly possible to support the middle class, small business, and housing because that's strong communities.
Because everybody hates moving.
And everybody hates moving.
It's so inefficient. It costs a lot of money.
Yes.
It's what's crazy about moving, if you think about it, sometimes like the move costs more than the raised rent. You just don't think about it, like time loss or whatever. Of course, this is coming from someone that owns their house, so I want to also be respectful. Like, I don't know what it's like, but like you said, if you're artificially putting a cap and then forcing, or like out of fear, owners are raising the rents, like you said, it causes more moving around.
Yes.
And not as much kind of like predictability.
Bingo. This forces higher rental churn. So House Bill 1217 forces higher rental churn, will force higher rent increases, will force less maintenance, will actually depromote or disincentivize the construction of new properties because people don't want to take risks. Because what happens with a lot of this legislation is this is the tip of the iceberg. Sure, they said it's going to sunset in 15 years, but has Washington ever taken away a law? No. Has Washington only added to laws or taxes or regulation? Yes. Therefore, more is coming. I want to give you kind of also some other notes. The other notes is you've got to have 90 days to increase the rents. You've got exemptions for new construction, which is 12 years. So what do hedge funds do? What do REITs do? What do the big bad boys do? It's kind of interesting that this carve out is here, that you have an exemption for new ones. Well, the new ones are going to be done by corporate America. The average landlord owns an old home from the 50s, 60s, and 70s that was maybe their first home, and then they just moved out and kept it. So Washington State said this was here to protect tenants, and I immediately see this language, and I go, that doesn't protect tenants. That helps hedge funds, investors, the boogeymen. for public or subsidized housing, they are out of it. Or for owner-occupied residential properties, that could be a single family with like an ADU or a DADU. That could be a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex. They call all that owner-occupied. There's no rent caps on them. What's also interesting too, when you look at these loopholes, where is this going to drive money? It's going to drive money right into the actual loopholes, and then you're going to get more old properties that aren't maintained that become more of a blight on the community because they're going to be ignored. People may not like flippers, but you have to realize when people come and flip a property, they're bringing it up to today's standard. That's how whole neighborhoods start to turn over. If I'm a flipper who likes to keep them as rentals, I'm not going to keep them as rentals. I'm going to flip and sell, or I'm just not going to flip at all. We need more activity that increases this. And, we've been talking a lot about, over the years, our investment strategies and how we've been doing this, even in our high-priced Washington, even in our low cash flow Washington. If you guys are enjoying this content, hit that magic subscribe button. Share this with a friend that needs to know about this, because next we're going to go through, what's happened historically. This is not a new concept. Way back in ancient Rome, brother, the concept of regulating rents started under Julius Caesar. Interesting.
Are we going to get to talk about Rome?
No, but I want to pontificate for a second. All great empires that get involved in the overregulation of something fall apart. What's happening to the U.S.? We've been a great empire for a long time. We are now in the overregulation. If we don't get some deregulation and slash this government spending, we will go the way of the Roman Empire. In the United States in the 1920s, we had the first local rent control laws. Right after World War II, we had a bunch of rent control laws because people returned from wartime. All of a sudden, we had the influx. It also led to a major housing boom. Decades later, they started working on rent stabilization in growing coastal cities in the Northeast and then in California. And then finally, in 2019, Oregon was the first state to implement a statewide rent control. California followed Oregon and also in 2019 and enacted its own and then became more strict during COVID. New York City has one of the most oldest and extensive rent regulation systems, but they're the weaker version known as rent stabilization. You've also seen this in Berlin, in Germany, and they're very strong tenant protection. So this isn't just a US thing. But here's what I want people to correct me on in the comments. Talk to me about rent control in Oregon, California, and New York, and tell me, did the quality of the housing go up or down? Did the rents outpace the national average? And I would bet, without even going and digging through the data, the quality of the rental pool went down. And I know it did in New York. I just didn't have time to look at Oregon and California. And there was less maintenance and less turnover. And I am almost positive that the rents exceeded the national average or went up faster than they were historically. Because when you remove the free market and start artificially pinching supply, even with good intentions, because I believe we need affordable housing and obtainable housing. They mean two different things. Affordable housing is rent for people below the median income in the area. Obtainable housing is starter homes so that the first-time home buyer can purchase that cute little house.
So I'm assuming that's the real issue, right? Like the reason this law is being passed is because the unaffordability problem. But what's the real issue?
I would agree with you that the House Bill 1217 in Washington State is being passed because of rents growing dramatically. Second, I would say it's because our politicians in Washington State have lost their ever-loving freaking mind. They just passed the largest tax increase in the history of Washington. We are becoming the anti-business, anti-landlord, pro-tax state. We were not this before. We've got to be very careful on this slippery slope. And to answer your question with a specific answer, and it's not a sexy one, it's a boring answer. It is the massive lack of supply due to the regulation and red tape known as zoning, permitting, developing. We've talked about this on many episodes before because I'm a real estate investor. I do a lot of land development. Regulation in the state of Washington over the last 20 years that I have been doing this has tripled in timelines and tripled in costs. And for some reason, our cities and our counties are still allowing people to work from home. They're not hiring people fast enough, and they're not providing the leadership to solve this housing crisis. So at the state level, they've started shoving it down cities' throats and counties' throats with the ADU bill, with the middle housing bill, with the lot splitting bill that just passed. They just passed lot splitting. So you're going to be able to draw a line, boom, you got 2 lots. But this lack of supply isn't sexy, and it's not a boogeyman. What they'd rather do is they'd rather blame a hedge fund. They'd rather blame someone else instead of taking care of the problem. And the problem is, during the great financial crisis, the United States, and especially here in the Seattle metro, we got about 4 years behind on housing. If you're not building enough housing, rents go up, prices go up. To exasperate this, Benji, I want all of our listeners to be on the exact same page, is that in 2022, when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, all of these large multifamily development applications dramatically slowed down. And someone in the comments is going to say, but I still see them building them. Yes, I agree with you. That's because they take 3 years from inception to come out of the ground. So the spigot shut off in 2022. That means the construction of all of these large multifamilies dries up in 25 and in the beginning of 2026. So mark my words, rents going up dramatically in 2026 because of this rent control bill and because of the lack of supply. But the lack of supply is the unsexy issue to solve.
All right, so who's the winners and losers in this situation?
The winners and the losers is tenants who are already in their property may potentially be a winner because they may not get their rents increased as much, which causes less turnover. And the winners are going to be the gigantic corporate landlords that can put up with this, that can deal with the regulation. The small ma and pa landlord, this scares them. This causes them to sell, put their money in another state, or put it into the stock market or treasuries or annuities or whatever it may be. It's going to remove the small landlord and help the corporate landlord. The corporate landlord's the winner, the tenant that's been there a long time. The city that gets to increase fees. The attorney general that gets to charge someone $7,500 if a tenant complains against them and wins. And then the tenant can win 3 months of rent if they lose. It's pretty punitive. So if the average rent's $3,000, so literally you'd have attorney's fees plus $6,000 plus $7,500 to the state attorney general. So that's $13,500 plus probably $10,000 attorney's fees. So to go fight one of these cases is going to cost the average investor, let's call it $25,000 to $50,000. Well, the average small mom and pop investor says, $25,000, they ain't making $25,000 in like 3 years on their one rental property. That would wipe out 3 years. That's no money to maintain it or fix it or deal with vacancies. The losers, everyone. Newcomers who want to move into the area, the small ma and pa landlords, the middle class, the stability of our communities. And it's like tenants are already hurt and inflation's already hurting everyone. And this is just like, they're like trying to swim to shore before they drown. And somebody's trying to kick them in the face and prevent them from swimming there. This is not throwing them a life raft. This is like throwing the raft on top of them upside down and hoping they make it.
To me, it just seems like something that lawmakers can pass to make them look like they're trying to help versus what you and I both know, and we can't take credit for this, but the people we work with that actually build houses, that takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of time. Let them cook, right? Let them do their thing, and we'll raise supply and then lower prices.
Bingo.
Period.
Bingo. What if Washington State, instead of doing something dumb like this, what if the rest of the country, instead of doing something dumb like this, said all permits have to pop out in 4 weeks? all development applications have to be fully approved in 90 days, and they cut the timelines by 75%. And then what if Washington State itself incentivized construction? Okay, whether it's tax breaks, whether it's interest rates, whatever it may be, but incentivized construction. And I'm not talking custom homes. I'm not talking homes over the median. I'm talking below the median, rental properties below the median, attainable first-time home buyers. I'm talking like a 1,500 square foot home and below, and filled in that bottom end. Because all we've been building because of the lack of profitability is big boxes and apartments. Does everyone want to live in an apartment or a 3,000 square foot home? Absolutely not. What is that doing to society? It's fragmenting it. I volunteer my time on a political action committee to go fight things like this, to go help in our local communities. And the only things that we push on, we don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, pink fluffy unicorn party. We care, do you support police, fire, education, housing, and small business? And anyone that supports that stuff, we try to help get them into city council, county council, mayor, PUD commissioner, school board, whatever it may be, because we got to get some of this common sense back. We've got to create more housing. And so this rent control is basically just a Band-Aid. And the real solution, like we've said, build more housing, deregulate the land development and new construction process. And the jury's out on whether or not House Bill 1217 is going to work. And historically, from an economic perspective, you should be massively skeptical, and it really says it doesn't work. But I sympathize with renters. I sympathize with the inflation eating everyone's pocketbook, but this is not the solution. And this will create opportunities for some. And that opportunity specifically, Benji, it creates opportunities for the corporate landlord and for the investor with intestinal fortitude. So this is one of those things where everyone's now going to be pushing in a certain direction to leave Washington, to pull their money out. For the person who owns 2 units and they have the intestinal fortitude and they're a detailed individual, or maybe they have staff. So I believe I'm talking about just over the small investor, the medium-sized investor, the person who owns 3 to 20 units. This is opportunity because they're already an organized business, and they can simply become a more organized business that systematically, consistently raises rents, systematically, consistently does the maintenance, and they can capitalize on this because the supply of rentals will most likely drop, which is going to artificially increase rents. So what does this mean for me? One of my partners called and he's like, brother, let's get out of Washington. I said, absolutely not. For us, because we're already a mid-size, this is the best thing that can happen for us. We will massively take advantage of this opportunity. We will grow our portfolio here because we have the staff to do it, we have the means to do it, and we will eat market share from the small landlord. Unfortunately, the corporate landlord is also going to eat market share in regards of this. So that's all I have for today. Hit that subscribe button. Drop any questions you have below. Argue with me in the comments because I know one of you feels like I am totally wrong. I want to keep this conversation going because this is the beginning. Let's see where we're at over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and come back and reanalyze this.